Welcome to Discerning Truths of Bill Donahue. I love that version of these. I like the piano version as well, where Michael's just sitting down and you can hear him worshiping God, and just somebody's recording it, but it was awesome. Uh, but I like the little upbeat one too. Pretty cool. Uh, Great musician, great friend. So today, well, before we get into the show, I'll take care of a little business, try to give people time to get here, right? But as always, I put up my address for any cards or letters. Emails go to bill@discerningtruth.com. I answer emails as I have time. I try not to let them lag too long, but any questions are acceptable. And then Prophet Club Clowns, with all the talk of false prophets Michael and I have been doing lately as part of our regular Bible study, I said it's kind of a warm up for more Prophet Clubs. And any emails for them, go to prophetclubclowns@gmail. If you're new, I have all my replays up on Cloud Hub. The easiest way to find me is go to channel, search for 217, scroll down, and you'll find my channel. And then you can go back and look at all the couple hundred streams I have up there. I'm not fancy, and there's not a lot of style to this program. I try to give you substance and serve you a good steak, and not worry about the ambiance of what's coming on in the show. But as rough as they are, I think you'll find them worth your time to go back and watch the replays. I started loading them on Rumble, but I was having a little difficulty, so that's kind of at a stall at this point, and I'll get back to it as I get time. And then anytime I do a show, I create a PDF of any slides I show you. I put it on the Discerning Truth groups on Telegram. That's for you to be able to go back and do your own study, check out and see if what I said is true. If you're just tuning in or you're watching replay, I broadcast Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays at noon Pacific time. And if you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel on DLive or Cloud Hub or whatever, you get notifications when I come on. Mondays and Wednesdays, I usually do a book of the Bible. Right now, I'm finishing Jude and 2 Peter. We did them together because they overlap so much. I will do the Gospel of John when we're finished. And then on Fridays, I try to teach you stuff that I don't think you're going to get taught in church, and look at questions that I don't think they're going to raise. And today will be no different. And then on Tuesdays, assuming we're both available, I join Neo on her program. She usually starts around 10:15 on Central Time, right? And I join her 20, 30 minutes into the program, and then we just talk about whatever's on Neo's mind. I really love our conversations. It's like her and I having a phone conversation, and you get to listen in. And then if there's any questions come up in the chat, we deal with that. And then I always want to promote my good friend, Michael Beatty, California, to many of you, singer, songwriter extraordinaire. God has really added to his giftings by turning him into a pretty amazing Bible teacher. And he's going through the book of Acts at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. Because I'm in Hawaii, that means I don't often get that show live at 3:30 a.m. here, but occasionally I'm up that early and I listen, but I always watch the replay. You can always tune in and catch Michael. And then on 1 p.m. on Wednesday, he does a prayer for the nation called Bend a Knee. And on Sunday morning, his lovely wife Linda joins him, and they're going through the Psalms. And like I said, Michael and I haven't scheduled exactly which Prophet Club's coming up next, but I can bet that they're on our mind to get them done. And I said after the new year I'd do it, and we're here after the new year. So there's an argument called the minimal facts argument for Jesus' resurrection, and I want to look at it, explain it to you if you haven't heard of it, what it is, and kind of look at some of the criticisms. Does it work? Is it a valid argument? does it commit logical fallacies, or is it a solid argument that Christians can learn? And the reasons I thought this is important is in 1 Peter 3:14-17, and I highlighted verse 15 here for you, but it says, even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed, having no fear of them, nor being troubled in your heart. Honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good than it should be God's will. Suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. Now, the context here of Peter is he's talking to Christians about how to respond to suffering. But I used to use that 1 Peter 3:15 as a tagline on a lot of signature lines when I wrote religious things, about always be prepared to make a defense to anyone that asks for a reason of the hope that lies within you. Sometimes you want to include the next part. It says, yet do it in gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, right? But the main part, and apologists will use the yellow part for as well, because we do want to be able to make a defense of the faith and explain what the faith is, why we have hope in it. Christians take different approaches to making a defense of their faith. A lot of people are fond of telling their testimonies. I often call them braggamonies, because it's often you're bragging about how much sin you did in your life. But they really are testimonies of what God did in your life, turning you around, if you've had that experience. But for Paul, the truth or falsity of Christianity rests on one fact and one fact only. Did Jesus get out of the tomb? Did he raise from the dead? And in 1 Corinthians 15, he makes a long argument on that. But he says if he didn't get out of the tomb, he's a liar. He's false witness. And we are dead in our sins, and we have no hope. I mean, that's pretty much it. And I want you to understand that in 1 Peter 3:15, the word to make a defense means to give a reason, or to give a reason in King James. It's apologia. It's where you get the term apologetics. If you study apologetics, it's not learning how to apologize. It's learning how to give a defense for your faith. And so my question, and what brings up this study, is if somebody asked you to give a reasoned defense for believing in Christianity, could you do it? And if not, if there's a really short, simple argument that proves this resurrection happened, we could all memorize that argument. We could all give it, right? But I want to make sure that argument is valid, right? Before I recommend doing it. Now, I first got exposed to this minimal facts argument by Dr. Gary Habermas. And if you're not familiar with Gary, highly recommended as an apologist. Awesome study. He came in as a guest lecturer at Biola when I was there on a Saturday. Only day in my life I ever got hand cramps taking notes was trying to take Gary's class. It was just a tidal wave of information and data. Mike Linconi, who you see me reference all the time, also uses his argument on a regular basis. Okay. Now, this argument posits or claims that there are certain core facts that even most skeptics accept as true statements about the claims of Christianity, specifically the death and resurrection of Jesus. And by just using these almost universally accepted facts, they claim we can make a reasoned defense for the basic claims of Christianity, and by extension, have that answer Peter tells us always to be able to be ready to give. If this argument is logically valid and can be used as that apologia for the Christian faith, then it's simple enough for all of us to learn and memorize and to be able to give the argument out. And today I hope to explain the argument and then test the claims by some critics that claim it can be easily debunked. In fact, you can Google minimal facts argument debunked and find websites that will present arguments that they claim show that this argument is not valid, and I'm going to address those as well. Now, the first idea is that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. And when I was younger, many scholars critical of Christianity even disputed the claims that Jesus was a real historical person. There were books and Church of the Historical Jesus, all this other stuff, because there was a real doubt whether any of the New Testament was true. And I mean, they were really going after it in a big way, that Jesus didn't even live, never mind die and raise from the dead. There's been enough evidence put forward that question is virtually over and settled. If somebody is still telling you that there's a question about this, they are so far behind the times that, you pat them on the head and tell them, nice try. But virtually every scholar, Christian or non-Christian scholar, that's looked at the evidence for Jesus has concluded that he lived, he was an itinerant preacher in the first century, and he died by Roman crucifixion. Those are basically accepted facts, okay? There's at least 11 different ancient sources that record his death. You have the first primary sources are the four Gospels, okay? They all independently report his death. Paul doesn't give us details of the the crucifixion of Jesus, but he speaks of it as a historical fact. And in fact, that argument in 1 Corinthians 15 says if it didn't happen, we're all fools, right? So he deals with it as a historical fact. The crucifixion of Jesus was recorded in non-Christian sources. Josephus, a Jewish historian, in Antiquities 18, chapter 3, says that's what happened. Tacitus, the Roman historian, and Annals 15.44 mentions it. Lucian of Samosa, a Greek satirist, in the works of Lucian, volume 4, and the death of Perigon, 11-13 talks about it. Mara bar Cyprian, a Syrian prisoner, in a letter of Mara, son of Cyprian, in that letter he mentions the crucifixion of Jesus. The Jewish Talmud in the Sanhedrin, 43a, mentions that he was crucified, okay? So, by the Romans. Now, that's accepted fact, so Jesus is there. The death on the cross is one of the most well-attested events in ancient history, and that quote comes from that he, Jesus, was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. And that's from John Dominic Crossan. And if you don't know who he is, he's a professing Christian, but very, very liberal Christian. And if you ever heard of the Jesus Seminar, they got around, and John Dominic Crossan was part of this, and they took the sayings of Jesus, and they added the Gospel of Thomas into there, okay? The four Gospels and the Gospel of Thomas, and they sat around and they voted with colored beads as to which sayings Jesus almost certainly said, probably didn't say, and almost certainly didn't say. And they voted. I mean, the arrogance of these people is beyond belief, but very liberal scholar, and he admits that this is such an attested fact that is without any reasonable debate, right? Now, the next fact is the disciples believed that he rose and appeared to them, okay? Now, the supporting facts right now I'm going to give you are evidence that they claimed it, okay? And in a minute, I'm going to get to the fact that they believed what they claimed. But the disciples claimed that Jesus appeared to them. That's written in all the New Testament records, okay? The Apostle Paul claims that Jesus appeared to him. The earliest Christian creeds, including 1 Corinthians chapter 15, all include the claim of the resurrection as a major point. The testimony of the early church fathers confirmed that the apostles claimed to have seen the risen Jesus. In Philippians 4:3, Paul refers to a Christian named Clement. This is believed by many to be the person who will come to be known as Clement, the Bishop of Rome, around AD 95. And Clement wrote a letter to the Church of Corinth. Some people thought Clement's letter should have been part of the New Testament, but he wasn't an apostle. It didn't have apostolic authority. It wasn't added into the scripture, but he definitely was a first century Christian. And, he mentions it. Irenaeus, church father, confirming Polycarp and Clement's connection to the apostles and against heresies, and Florinius confirms that they said it. Tertullian, confirming Polycarp and Clement's connection to the apostles in a prescription against heretics 32, confirms that they taught the resurrection happened, and they claimed that he had seen it. The resurrection is an important aspect of the writing of most early church fathers. I would say all early church fathers, but I'm leaving out that maybe one wasn't so focused on the resurrection, but it is the central claim of Christianity. And there isn't anywhere in early Christian writings where any of the early church fathers, any of the apostles or whatever, didn't put it forth as having happened. And like I said, this evidence only shows that they claimed it. It doesn't show that they believed it. I'll get to that part in just a minute. Right? Now, you might, for ease, I'm going to do 3 and 4 similar facts. And if you want to do this as a 5-fact argument, you can put these together. But I broke them apart for you. Paul was the persecutor of the church and suddenly changed, right? Paul was unknown to the disciples until he started persecuting them, and you see that in Galatians 1, 22 and 23. The conversion of Paul was not the conversion of a neutral observer, but rather the conversion of an enemy of the gospel. Paul does not claim that any argument was made which persuaded him to become a Christian. Rather, he claims that he saw the risen Jesus, and that this experience was what changed him from a murderer of Christians to a passionate believer who wrote much of the New Testament. So here's the idea that it is the resurrection Jesus that changes people, right? Now, James was a skeptical brother, and you always see me put kin in there instead of brother. I'm leaving open that for people to hold a different interpretation, that he may have been a relative other than a half-brother, where he could have been a half-brother, and he clearly didn't have the same father with Jesus, but could have had the same mother, or they could have Joseph from an earlier marriage, or it could be kin. The word's not that clear. I favor the fact that he is a literal brother of Jesus, but it's not something you can be dogmatic about. Now, the Bible records that brothers being skeptical. Josephus mentions the brother of Jesus who was called the Christ, whose name was James, in Antiquities 20:200. And skeptics often argue that Josephus' writings have been proven to be fraudulent, while some of his supposed writings, especially the Testimonium Flavium, and that's the area where he talks about Jesus in a very flattering way, have been shown to be altered texts. This particular writing is considered by nearly all scholars to be authentic and thus included in the list of minimal facts. There is much other evidence, both from secular and Christian sources, telling us about James' brother Christ. And I just want to add some clarification there, because I'm saying that the testimony of Flavium has been shown to be an altered text, and I'm not sure, I may have worded that too strong. Most scholars believe it's an altered text. My rebuttal to that is, can you show me a copy of Josephus' work that doesn't include this? And they can't. So I don't know that it has been shown to be an altered text, but the evidence for it being altered is pretty substantial. And but the part where Josephus talks about James, nobody thinks is altered. The early church fathers in church history give unanimous testimony that it was James, the brother or kin of Jesus, who led the church at Jerusalem. In Acts 15, Luke records a dispute between Peter and Paul over circumcision, and they go in front of the other people in Jerusalem. James heads that council, showing that James is the leader of the church in Jerusalem. How do you get somebody who's skeptical about his brother's claims of being the Messiah, and then suddenly, post-resurrection, he is absolutely running the show here in Jerusalem, right? And that's the argument. Paul changed, James changed. In fact, all the disciples changed, right? You got disciples that can't stay awake at night when Jesus is praying and sweating blood before the crucifixion, who after post-crucifixion won't stop speaking about Jesus, right? I mean, the completely different change in that thing. The other accepted fact is that the tomb is empty, okay? An examination of both the Pauline and the gospel materials leads to 8 lines of evidence that support the conclusion that Jesus' tomb was discovered empty, okay? Paul's testimony implies the historicity of the empty tomb. The presence of the empty tomb periscope in the pre-Markian Passion story purports its historicity. Okay, this comes from the idea. Most scholars believe that Mark is the earliest gospel. I disagree. I think Matthew's the earliest gospel. The early church fathers said Matthew was the earliest gospel. That Matthew wrote in Hebrew first, and I just did a study on this. But I'm dealing with scholarly material. Most scholars hold that Mark is the earliest gospel, and empty tomb is basically seems to be there in Mark. The use of on the first day of the week instead of on the third day points to the primitiveness of this tradition. Okay, and the narrative in theology is theologically unadorned and non-apologetic. It's just put it out there as a claim. It's not like spun in any way in the gospel. It's just, oh yeah, the women went to the tomb. The discovery of the tomb by women is highly probable in a culture that did not accept the testimony of women in court, okay? Because they were not considered reliable witnesses. If you were making up a story, you're not going to make your first primary witness being women. You're certainly, if Mary Magdalene was a woman of questionable, background, and I don't know that she was. I think that may be part of just church tradition that has developed over the years. But if she was the woman who was caught in sin, if that's the truth, you definitely are not going to make Mary Magdalene your chief spokesperson. And she's the first person that sees the risen Jesus. If you're making up a lie, you don't put in those kind of facts. And it would have been impossible for the disciples to proclaim the resurrection in Jerusalem had the tomb not been empty. Because all the Jewish leaders would have had to do is go empty the tomb, right? Or go show people the tomb and pull Jesus' body out and go, they're liars, right? You know? And the source of this list comes from the historicity of the empty tomb of Jesus in New Testament studies, pages 39 to 67. So you have a pretty well accepted fact. Even skeptics agree that the tomb was empty. In fact, the early, the Gospels, the New Testament says that the Jewish leaders accused them of stealing the body. That presupposes that there is an empty tomb, because if they didn't steal the body would be in the tomb, unless it rose from the dead, right? You know? Now here we get back to the crux of the issue, right? The apostles died for what they believed. Okay? Now I showed you what they preached. It's clear that they preached that Jesus rose. but they died for that. And it's attested to in early Christian documents that, with the exception of John, oh, that should say exception, I'll fix that, of John, each apostle was killed for their faith. Now, when you go back and you try to do the study in modern times, we can have more confidence in the martyrdoms of Peter, Paul, James, the brother of John, probably Thomas and Andrew. There's pretty good historical evidence of that. We have much less evidence for Matthias and James, the son of Alphaeus, in their deaths. But there is no claims offering alternate deaths. Okay, so all the evidence we have, even some of it is less credible than others, all the evidence we have is that the apostles, when under persecution and the threat of death, none ever denied their faith. And the issue is, are you going to do that for a lie? Would you ever go to your death for a lie? Okay. There's 5 theories to attempt to reconcile those facts. Okay. There's the Christian theory that Jesus rose from the dead, and that explains why everybody preached it and they believed it and they died for themselves. Why it explains why the tomb is empty. It explains all that. You have a second theory called Jesus resuscitated, sometimes called the swoon theory. And this idea is that the Romans didn't quite kill Jesus. They mistook him for being dead on the cross. So they stuck him in the tomb, and they had stabbed him through the side. They beat him, crucified him, whipped him, put a spear through his side, but unsuccessfully killed him. Put him in the tomb, and Jesus, in the cool air of the tomb, resuscitated, pushed the stone aside, subdued the guards, and got on. Well, no, the swoon theory doesn't go into the fact of how he got the stone moved and how he got past the Roman guards, but they try to present this idea that Jesus resuscitated in the cool of the tomb, and all those aloes and herbs and stuff that Joseph and Arimathea put on him, that helped him and recover. The problem with this theory is that the apostles still need to be liars. If this theory is true, the apostles have to be liars, because they didn't preach a recovering, emaciated Christ who was there, but they preached a risen, vibrant Christ who was walking among them, eating and totally restored to life. So they're liars. Okay? The resuscitated theory does not, it explains the empty tomb, right? Doesn't explain how he overcame the guards or how he did any other stuff. It doesn't explain why the apostles would have died for a lie, right? Then you got this other idea that the disciples lied. And this is where this theory has its thing. You can get a group of people that maybe committed a crime, and if you keep them together, the peer pressure might get them to all stick in the lie. It's one reason police separate suspects and get them to talk separately, is because when you break them apart, you can usually catch them in a lie. You can do this. We have the 12 apostles going to all over the kingdom. The history records that they were killed, many of them gruesomely killed. Thomas reported, I think Thomas is the one that they whipped to death, and they whipped until his skin came off, and never turned around. You have this. So is it psychologically possible for 12 people who know they're lying to stick to that lie when there's no TV, there's no internet? All they got to do is, if they start getting in too much trouble in one city, you just recant your story, leave town, go to a new city, and try to get followers in that city, and you can get away. There is no evidence from history of any apostle ever recanting the story, or any apostle ever admitting to have lied about it, right? So again, this doesn't really explain anything other than it's trying to say, well, this is all a fabricated story. It's a fabricated story that happens to have all these supporting evidences that it's true, right? The other idea was put forth that this was a mass hallucination, that the disciples believed Jesus was going to raise from the dead, that they were expecting his resurrection, that they were looking forward to his resurrection, and they had this mass hallucination event. The problem with this is many, but the first problem is the New Testament doesn't record that they expected the resurrection. It is absolutely clear that they were not understanding what he said until after the fact. Then they go back and they say, oh, when he talked about destroy this temple and raise it up, that's what he was talking about. I get it now after the fact. So they did not have the mindset in the thing to be expecting it. Okay? Paul and James and the disciples constitute no less than 13 individuals who believe they witnessed Jesus, right? Paul certainly wasn't expecting to see the resurrected Jesus. So how do you explain him? The hallucination doesn't work for Paul at all. Paul also tells them that Jesus appeared to a group of 500 people in 1 Corinthians 15:6. Okay? So now Paul has to be a liar. Okay? He lied about seeing Jesus, and he lied about these 500 people that he appeared to. But in 1 Corinthians, he says many of them are still alive, right? They appeared to him. And the earliest Christian creeds already mention, these appearances. And the creed is the earliest information in 1 Corinthians 15 that we have. It's a creedal statement by Paul. And when you date back, because there's accepted dates for when Paul wrote to the Corinthians. It's considered one of the earliest Christian documents that we have, maybe earlier than many of the Gospels. And that Paul wrote to the Corinthians. And we have that date. And then you can go back through, and Paul stayed here for 2 years and there for 3 years and went here for that. And you calculate back and find the date that he went and met with the apostles in Jerusalem, right? It's when he says, I'm going to give to you what was first given to me. And you can date that back. And depends on what date you pick for the crucifixion, you are within 5 years of the crucifixion and possibly within months of the crucifixion that he is doing this. So you don't have time for this, what we're going to, legendary development. I'm going to get to that more in a minute, and because that's another argument. It's incredibly unlikely that such a large number of people or groups would have this exact same hallucination, especially since we know that hallucinations are subjectively unique to individuals and extremely unlikely to be shared by more than one person. The hallucination hypothesis can't explain the empty tombs. Some early critics strongly opposed early Christianity claims about the resurrection, and I give you in Matthew and Justin Martin's dialogue with Tropho and Tertullian's on Spectacles in 30. All of them discuss the fact that they were trying to say that the apostles stole the body. They were trying to explain the early empty tomb very early in the Christian walk. It wasn't something that Christians came up with many, many years later, right? The next idea that this resurrection is a legendary adaptation of Christianity. Liberal Christians even often will buy into this to a certain degree, especially those that hold to that Mark is the first gospel, because it doesn't really go into the resurrection a lot. And that they say Matthew and Luke and John add on details, add on legendary details that Mark didn't include. Well, one, you have to assume Mark is first. You have to assume that Mark is not endorsing resurrection, which he does. And then, you're basically trying to force a legend on there. But legends, we know, like with Buddha, the idea that Buddha was some kind of divine being or deification of Buddha happened about 600 years after Buddha lived. For the first 600 years, there was no claims of that divinity. Okay? They take centuries to happen. But 1 Corinthians 5, 3 to 8, Paul gives what he first received. And like I said, he got this within a maximum of 5 years and a minimum of a few months after the resurrection. And he says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scripture, that he was buried and raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers together at one time. Most of them were still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." Okay? So Paul's telling you that he also received the story of the resurrection. When did he receive it? And the only time he could have received this is when he went to meet with the apostles after his conversion experience. And so when you get that back within months of the crucifixion, or at most a few years, there's no support for a legendary development. So we can all memorize, and you can download these. And like I said, facts, the Paul and James being converted, you can merge into one or change because they're very similar. And then you have 5 facts to remember, right? And then there's going to be 5 objections. There's 5 alternate theories to the theory that helps in the mnemonic of memorizing these arguments, right? But there are people out there, as critics always will, who claim that this argument is logically fallacious in one way or another. The first argument I've seen says the argument commits the straw man fallacy. Now, a straw man is when you mischaracterize what somebody's position is and then destroy that mischaracterization and then claim to have destroyed their argument. Okay? So they're saying that by focusing on these 5 facts alone that everybody accepts, virtually everybody accepts, that the Gary Habermas and other apologists are ignoring all the other arguments atheists and non-believers have against Christianity. And they destroy the fact that their argument is that Jesus didn't rise from the dead in this argument, but they have ignored the rest of them. Well, that's not the case. It would be a straw man fallacy if that's what they did, but the apologists are following Paul's lead by saying that Christianity wouldn't be true if the resurrection didn't happen. They're not limiting their arguments against dealing with all the arguments against Christianity. They're dealing with the one central claim of Christianity, that without it, Christianity is false. And saying, we have evidence that this point is true. Now bring on your next argument. Let's admit Jesus rose from the dead, right? Because that's what the evidence shows. Next, you got something else that you want to deny Christianity? Bring it on, okay? But let's get to this point first. Jesus rose from the tomb, from the dead, right? And so it is not a straw man fallacy. And I love people that they realize most people don't take logic and reasoning and don't go through those philosophy classes in college, and they throw out these claims of logical fallacies, and most people don't know how to defend against them. But all you got to do is look back and look up what a fallacy is, what it would entail, and ask yourself, does this argument do that? The second one is that it's a non sequitur. Non sequitur means does not follow. That you put a bunch of facts together and then you reach a conclusion that those facts don't add up to that conclusion, right? And that they claim these minimal facts require a huge argumentative leap from people thinking Jesus rose from the dead or believing he rose from the dead to that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And part of their argument about it being non sequitur is true, but it's not non sequitur because they make it non sequitur in their rebuttal. Okay, they are correct in identifying this argument as being based on what people believe and what people said and what people thought, right? Paul thought he saw Jesus from the thing. The apostles believed that they saw the resurrected Jesus. That doesn't mean there might be some other explanation for them thinking and believing that. And this is where they're saying there's a huge leap, and they're saying there's psychological factors or whatever. No, because this argument is saying what confirms that their belief is real is that they died for it, that they really believed it. And if any other explanation is true, they would have had to lie and know they were lying. Okay? And that's the problem. And that's why it's not a non sequitur, because that you first have to establish what they believe, show that any other altered theory would require them to lie, and to show that they died for what they believed, and that how illogical it is that they would have died for a lie. And this is their evidence for the resurrection. Then they claim that this is circular reasoning. Okay, this is funny. Circular reasoning is known as petitio principio, begging the question, right? And it occurs when the premises presume, openly or covertly, the very conclusion that is to be demonstrated. Okay? Now, critics claim that because the argument is based on the premises contained in a Christian worldview, i.e., that miracles like the resurrection can happen because God exists, right? And therefore the argument is circular. But again, the opposite is true. They're making a circular argument. The naturalist assumes that God doesn't exist, and therefore miracles can't happen, right? Their argument concludes, therefore, that Jesus could not have been raised from the dead because miracles don't happen, and that would have been a miracle. It is their criticism that is circular, not the argument here. Almost every argument or premise in a logical argument is based on some other claim. And yes, this argument is based on the idea that miracles can happen, that God does exist. There are good arguments for that. I presented 2 studies showing why God exists, cumulative case argument for that. And so my premise is not just, I'm not presuming a conclusion. I'm building upon that premise that God exists, and then showing that because God exists and can do miracles, that the miracle of the resurrection is not impossible, and evidence does show that it happened. That's not circular reasoning. That's how logic works, right? Then the next one is that the argument is ad hoc. And this just criticism comes up against Christianity all the time. In Latin, ad hoc literally means for this, right? In English, it describes anything that can be thought of as existing for the purpose only. For example, an ad hoc committee is generally authorized to look at a single matter of limited scope, not the purpose of any other interest. Okay? Congress will have ad hoc committees. Some organizations will create ad hoc committees for one specific issue. And so what they're saying is that the ad hoc part of this fallacy is that God exists. Okay, that you need God to exist for this miracle to happen. Absolutely true. You need that, but it's not it's not ad hoc, because I'm not appealing to the gods of the gaps. I'm saying God exists. I can show you that God exists. I can show you that all arguments lead you to a conclusion that is more likely God exists than he doesn't exist. And therefore, they create a cumulative case argument for God's existence. And so that you, therefore, cannot just arbitrarily eliminate the possibility of God existing and therefore eliminate the possibility of miracles. And so it is true that Jesus rising from the dead does require God to exist. It's wrong to argue that God existence is an ad hoc argument. This is just, it's not true. I did 2 streams discussing this, that God exists. And so their arguments here are fallacious, and they just make them all the time. And Christians that are not trained in how to defend your faith run into this. Often you'll come up and they'll, I believe this, I believe the Bible's true because it says it's true, is a circular reasoning. And we have Christians do that kind of stuff all the time and make those kind of statements. So we're not really trained how to differentiate between what's a solid rational argument and what is not. So when critics claim to be smarter than you and know more than you, and that they put you down for making these theories, these arguments, is because they in themselves have been taught that and they never questioned it, and they parrot what they hear. And that gets to be the problem. So with that, I'm going to put on a video. I see a bunch of comments in the chat. I haven't gone back to see what they are. And I will I'm going to come back and talk to you in just a second. Thanks.
Alone and so afraid, I was searching for my answers, not your mercy. You are my sacrifice. You are my King of glory. You are my everything. You are my Lamb of God. A love so real, not hard to understand. I was blinded to my Savior, but now I see. You are my sacrifice. You are my King of glory. You are my everything. You are my Lamb of God. Lightning tests, and I see you hanging on a cross for me. You carry my burdens, and the scars remain to remind me I'm forgiven. You are my sacrifice. You are my Lamb of God.
Well, I didn't cut him off, so I'm not sure how that video cut off just so suddenly, but I see in the chat that CloutHub may have had a little hiccup here. If that happened, I will upload a clean copy on CloutHub. I record when I go online, so if it's 2 parts up there on CloutHub, I'll delete them and put up a new video for you to watch on replay. But Yeah, thank you. That this is good information. Like I said, it is my heart for us to be able to give good reasons for the faith that's in us. That I didn't check my brain at the door when I became a Christian. That my faith is a reasonable faith. It's based in fact. It's based in reason and logic and faith. It's a faith supported by logic and reason, not a blind faith that is contrary to all fact. And so I hope this helps you too. And like I said, we can all memorize if you combine, like I said, Peter and James, or Paul and James, being hostile to the claims of Christianity and suddenly be changed into one fact. Then you have 5 facts to remember and 5 criticisms to remember and how to rebut those. And I think we can all memorize 10 things and make a argument for the thing. And so I hope this is helpful to you. And God willing, Monday I'll be back, and we'll be in 2 Peter chapter 3 and how it relates to Jude. Less correlation than we had in 2 Peter 2, but still there. And I hope to see you all next week. And with that, I'm going to get out of here, and may God bless you all. All right.